Hi guys, it's Dylan from Bijou Diamond Jewellery in London with another watch discussion video, and today we're going to have a look at some questions that people asked me last week. So I'll just run through the questions real quick so you can kind of guess if this is something you want to watch or not, or you can skip to the part that has that question. What watch got you into watches? What is your current collection? What watch are you wearing? How long have you been interested in watches? And what sparked your original interest? Your favorite day-to-day watch for wearability every day and also comfort. Best Swiss watch to start a collection. Is Richard Mille a fad, like a phase? Are the prices too high? Do you think they'll continue to climb? And finally, I had a question for, I have £14,000 to spend on a steel watch. What would you recommend? Okay, so let's start with how long have I been into watches and what sparked my original interest. So around the age of 15, I kind of got into fashion, and then around 16, I got into the luxury industry and luxury fashion. I loved the finer detail, loved the care and the craftsmanship that went into luxury fashion, and I also loved the brands. You know, the way the brands marketed themselves, and anything from bags to shoes to actual clothes, belts, blah blah blah, you name it. I just loved that whole luxury industry and that super high-end level of craftsmanship. And I actually live in London as well, so we're really fortunate. We've got a lot of places to go and see luxury fashion in London, and one of those big spots is Harrods. I used to spend a lot of time at Harrods when I was younger, kind of around 16, 17. I'd be there definitely most weekends. I would sometimes go after school some days. I just loved Harrods. It shuts quite late as well, so it means you can go and check it out later on in the evening. I used to spend most of my time in Harrods looking around like the clothes sections, all the different brands, and just looking at the clothes and really admiring them. But I eventually ran out of clothes, you know, after so many trips. I ran out of things to look at there because the seasons obviously didn't change very quickly. So I started to venture out of the clothes departments within Harrods, and I looked at other things like watches and jewellery, and the other parts of that, you know, of Sloane Street and Knightsbridge as well. And obviously watches goes hand in hand with luxury fashion, and it's very much part of the luxury industry. I then started to spend quite a lot of time in the Harrods watch department, the fine watch room. Instead of spending most of my time looking at the clothes in Harrods and Sloane Street and Knightsbridge, I then started to look more so at the watches, and I spent most of my time in there. I started to chat to a lot of the people in there and became friendly with some of the people that worked in the fine watch room. And I really loved looking at watches. I loved learning about watches, and it was a completely new market to what I was used to. So I was fascinated by watches. But I always gravitated towards AP, Audemars Piguet. They always had the best watches, in my opinion, and this was from when I knew absolutely nothing about watches. I just loved the designer, loved how they looked. I wasn't interested in Rolex or Hublot or any of the other brands in Harrods. I was just really always went over to AP and just stared for ages in the window at the watches and spoke to the people in there. I always felt like it had a cooler vibe in Audemars Piguet, and the designs were just so unique and beautiful. Yeah, I really did fall in love with AP first, and that's kind of what brought me into watches. One time when I went into Harrods, and in the window at Audemars Piguet, there was a Royal Oak in rose gold with a tourbillon, and that just blew me away. I'd never seen a tourbillon in my life. I had no clue what on earth it was, but I was just mesmerized. I literally stood there staring at it for like 5 minutes, and they must have thought I was such a weirdo, but I suppose they saw my passion. They said, hey, do you want to try it on? And I tried it on, and that was a magical moment for me. That was when I really fell in love with watches. But the watch that really got me obsessed with watches was the Royal Oak Offshore. When I saw that watch and I tried that watch on, I knew I had to have it. I loved watches so much from that point. I wasn't interested in fashion at all, you know. I was just solely focused like blinkers on that Offshore. I knew I had to work until I owned an Offshore. So that brings me on to my next question that I need to answer, which is, what is your collection? Now, I always have really believed in having one watch only at all times. And the reason why I do that is because I like to wear my watch all the time. It doesn't matter if I'm walking or running or you know, in a meeting or whatever it is. I always wear my watch every single day, all day. Sometimes I even forget to take it off and I wear it while I'm sleeping. So I always look for a watch that's really good for any occasion. My first watch I will skip, and I'll come on to that last. But the second watch I bought was what I said, the Audemars Piguet Rolex Offshore in navy. That's such a cool watch, still one of my favorite watches now. It was much bigger than any watches I'd owned previous to that, sort of less, you know, high-end Swiss watches, the watches you have when you're a kid. I bought that watch when I was 18 and I worked every single day at the job I did just to be able to afford that watch, and I saved up and saved up. And I had no regrets of buying that watch. I loved it so much. It was great for me to be able to wear, you know, on a sporty occasion or a more casual occasion, and I could also dress that watch up. And it was also, for me, really what AP was about. I loved that high-end case finishing. I loved the finer details, the polished and brushed accents on that watch. And that really to me was like a high-end Swiss watch. You know, I didn't see anything like that ever. And my friends at the time obviously had no clue about Swiss watches, and they always said, oh wow, that looks so cool. You know, it's a really unique looking watch. So yeah, I was very pleased I bought that watch. Later, I then sold that watch and bought a Rolex Submariner. Steel Submariner, the black one with the ceramic bezel, black dial and date. So kind of the standard steel Submariner. I actually at that time had my offshore, and I always just wore the offshore over the Submariner, but I ended up selling the watch, the AP, and then buying the Rolex, and I ended up wearing that Rolex actually quite a lot. The Rolex pretty much stayed permanently on a pearl-on strap because I preferred that kind of more casual style to the watch. The great thing about those Rolexes and the difference between them and the APs is it's just so easy to change the strap. It literally takes you 2 seconds to switch out that pearl-on strap and put a different color on, match it to your outfit. And also they're much cheaper as well than the AP rubber straps. So the Rolex offered me a bit more versatility, and I also didn't really want a watch that was so large. Even though that offshore is 42 mil, it wears much more like 44 mil. So I really wanted a watch that was a little smaller. So I had the Submariner for about a year and a bit, and after a year I kind of wanted to change. I loved the watch, but I wanted something that was a little bit more smaller and a little bit more classic. And I then bought a bimetal Daytona with a white dial, the old reference 116523. That's a beautiful watch. I loved that watch, and I only actually sold it 2 weeks ago. So yeah, it was a great watch for me to be able to put my straps on again, because it had a white dial, which meant it went with almost anything. And I love white dial watches. Obviously my AP was a white dial, and I really missed that in the Submariner to not have a white dial. I also missed that chronograph function. I love pushers on the side of a watch. I think it adds real presence to a piece. I suppose the crown guards on the Submariner kind of added that same feeling, but it wasn't the same as that Daytona. Obviously the Daytona is slightly smaller wearing than the Submariner, and a little bit more classic looking as well. So I had the Daytona for about a year again, and the Daytona I wore pretty much, I'd say maybe 99.8% on the straps. I really only ever wore it on the bracelet when I first got it, and then maybe after 2 days I took it off the bracelet and put it on the strap. I just much prefer straps to bracelets. I found it more comfortable to wear, and yeah, it was just a nicer, you know, everyday piece for me. I always wear my watch every day, like I mentioned before, so it was just more appropriate for me. I didn't really want to scratch the bracelet, and I also preferred the more subtle look of it on the pearl-on strap. Now for my first watch. My first watch was actually a watch that my dad gave me when I was about 16, and it was his dad's, and my dad used to wear it every single day, and he stopped wearing it about 20 years ago or 30 years ago, so it sat in a drawer for about 20 or 30 years. And I said to him as I was getting into watches, I said, hey, do you have any watches that you can give me, or do you have anything that I can just wear? Because I didn't have any watch at that time. And he said, yeah, I've got this old Omega that my dad gave me. And he pulled it out the drawer, and we found it in the drawer, and we wound it. And all of a sudden it came to life, even though it hadn't been worn in 30 years and just sat in a drawer. So I think that's really an amazing thing. And to Omega, you know, credits to Omega for making a beautiful movement that can withstand the test of time. So I wore this watch pretty much every single day. I even played tennis in it, hence the cracks on the crystal. I know that's not a smart thing to do, but I was young and I just really loved watches, and I just wanted to wear it all the time. I just fell in love with that romance of wearing your watch all the time and it coming with you everywhere. So this watch is an Omega automatic, and it is from around 1963. I originally used to wear it on a leather strap, but now I wear it on a purlin strap because it's much more comfortable for me. I do find the purlins much more comfortable as they are like a cloth weave type thing, so they're much more softer, they can form to your wrist much better as well, and they're much more low profile than a leather strap or a bracelet. I love this watch. I will never ever sell this watch. It will be with me for the rest of my life, and I'm sure I'll give it to my son and he'll give it to his son. It's very small at 33 mil, and I think that is probably why I'm going back and back and back in terms of getting smaller and smaller watches. Going from that 42 mil from that 42 mil offshore was obviously a huge jump, and I kind of missed that smaller style, that smaller, more subtle look from a watch. And that brings me on to my next question, which is what watch am I wearing now? What do I have in my current collection? And this is all I have in my current collection at the moment because I just sold my other watch. I actually just want to enjoy this for a little bit, a little bit more, and enjoy this for a while. And I know what watch I'm going to get next, so take a guess in the comments and see if you can guess right. I definitely know which one I want, and I'm very excited about it, but I just want to enjoy this for a little while more because I feel like I didn't really properly enjoy it before when I was a bit younger. Next question is favorite watch for day to day, so in terms of comfort and wearability, etc, etc. So day to day, I'd actually say personally for me the most comfortable watch I've ever worn is this Omega that I just spoke about now, because it's so light and small and it's on this purlin strap. You don't really feel it on your wrist. It's, you can kind of forget about it. It's not very heavy, and it's small case size as well, so it's very hard to dink this watch. And obviously being on a purlin strap, you're not scratching any bracelets. It doesn't matter if you dink the side of the cloth because you can't scratch cloth. I think any watch with a strap is much more comfortable. I prefer strap watches anyway because, like I said, if you can't really damage a strap as easy as you can damage a bracelet. They also tend to be a little bit more comfortable straps versus bracelets. Sometimes people find that the hairs can be pinched between the links in the bracelet, and yeah, the bracelets can sometimes dig into the sides of your wrist because they are sharp edged, obviously they're metal. However, there is one bracelet that I did find very comfortable, and that was my Submariner bracelet. The reason why I chose the Submariner bracelet, or why I'm saying the Submariner bracelet now over just a normal Oyster bracelet, is because the Submariner featured the glide lock clasp, and I think that's a really useful feature if you want to wear it for every day. So for example, now in London it's quite hot outside and your wrist will expand under the heat, whereas in the winter it will contract and be smaller. So it's important to be able to adjust that bracelet quickly if you need it, and that was really useful on that watch. And for that reason, it was one of the most comfortable bracelets I've ever worn. You don't really feel it on, it just feels really nice. It doesn't pinch at all as well. In terms of favorite watch for day-to-day wear and comfort, I'd say probably a steel Rolex, preferably a Submariner for that bracelet, but really a strap, any strap watch will be really great to wear for every day. Next question is Richard Mille a phase or a fad? Will they go out of fashion, and also why are the prices so high? Do we think that they'll still keep up those same prices? It obviously all boils down to supply and demand. So let's start with supply. They make around 2,800 to 3,000 watches a year. So it's obviously a very tiny amount of watches per year. So the actual supply of watches is very tiny. And they only ever really, if you look online, there's only ever really a small handful of their watches available for sale on the used market. So the supply side of Richard Mille is very small. They don't flood the market at all. They make very few watches a year. The demand is kept kind of high, and it's increased a lot over the last couple of years. We've seen a lot of people in pop culture wearing Richard Mille, and obviously in the last 5 years, or maybe even longer than that actually, we've seen a lot of people in the sports industry wearing them. So in F1, they're huge in F1. They're also big in tennis and golf with Bubba Watson and Rafael Nadal. So there's plenty of sportsmen out there that are wearing them, and that gets the brand out there. And the reason why they do that is Richard Mille himself, the owner of the brand, actually used to work in marketing and actually used to help watch companies with marketing. So he really does understand the industry and how to market watches. Let's move on now to price. They are expensive to create, so they are kind of similar to how Bugatti came about. So when Bugatti made the Veyron, they actually made a loss on every single car. So even though the car cost over £1 million or dollars, I think, I don't really know lots about cars, I know it was over £1 million, and they sell from near that or over that now. And that's because they put so much money into the research and the materials and the build of that car that they still made a loss in the end. And that's the same with Richard Mille. They made a loss in the beginning as well. And the watches have to be very expensive because they put so much research and technology into crafting those insane watches. They're incredibly complex, and the materials they use are very, very limited. These materials they're using for the watches are usually alloys that they're making in-house or special different materials that they've created. So it's a very expensive process to create a Richard Mille. And because of that, the skill and craftsmanship that's required to create them and the materials is very limited. There's not many watchmakers out there that can actually create a watch or have that sort of knowledge of chemistry and physics to that level. So for that reason, I understand why they are high priced, but I think they're probably a little bit too high. So if you take, for example, a tourbillon Richard Mille, you're looking at kind of around £700,000. And if you compare that to a Patek Philippe tourbillon, and that also is for time only, so just a hour hand and a minute hand tourbillon from Richard Mille. If you look at the same from Patek Philippe, you're looking at more like 150 to 200,000 pounds used in the used market. So there's a massive difference to go from someone like Richard Mille, who's very new and young, to like the ultimate in prestige watchmaking, apart from independent watchmakers, which is Patek Philippe. You kind of can't really work out why the difference would be that much, but obviously they're doing it because of the materials and the technology they put into that piece. But yeah, I do think that probably their prices are a little bit too high. Also, I find that the finishing on the watches is actually quite poor compared to someone like Audemars Piguet, who makes very forward-thinking and conceptual and beautiful watches that are full of technology and incredible materials. They are in a way similar to Richard Mille in with their concept, but they finish the watches to a much higher standard than Richard Mille. The Richard Milles always look a little bit basic in terms of their movement and the hands and the case finishing versus other brands. So yeah, that's something that disappoints me a little bit about them. Do I think they'd have a future? I think they're going to stay solid within the next 2 to 3 years. I think because they're doing something that's so unique and they're still kind of relevant and popular now, I think they will still continue with their growth. But if we look back to 2 years ago, so 2016, we were selling an RM30 rose gold for around £60,000, whereas now that watch is selling for over £110,000. So there's a huge jump, almost double the price in 2 years. So there's definitely demand there. There are a lot of people paying the money for these watches. They definitely have become more popular, but it just depends if they will continue that same, or generate that same interest within the industry. We have to remember they made their first watch only 17 years ago in 2001. So they're a very, very young company. We don't have the history to compare like we do from Audemars Piguet and Patek Philippe and Rolex and all the other big brands like Breguet. So it's difficult for us to predict how they're going to do. They are looking at such a limited market though. That's something we have to bear in mind. Their market is kind of the real super rich, and you look at something like a Patek Philippe. To get into a Patek Philippe, you can look at spending around £10,000 to £15,000 to get into a Patek. So the entry level is much lower than a Richard Mille, which is around late 40s, so mid to late £40,000 for your entry level Richard Mille, which is a massive, massive outlay. You think probably for that same money you could be looking at a Grand Complication Patek. So I know personally which I'd prefer, and I'm sure there's a lot of other people in the industry that would prefer the Patek, because that really is a very expensive watch for quite a basic watch as well from Richard Mille. So I think whether or not people still keep going with that concept and still love that idea that Richard Mille is this super high-end watch company, or if that bubble will burst, I don't know, we'll just have to see. But I think for the next 2 to 3 years, they'll continue on their path and continue to grow. Okay, moving on to the next question, which is, if you had 14,000 to spend on a watch, what would you spend it on? Steel watch specifically, and I currently own a Datejust 41mm in rose and steel. I'm going to assume when you say 14k, I'm going to assume you mean pounds, but I will mention $8 one. But I'm going to focus my discussion on £14,000. So a lot of people would say a steel Daytona would be a good option around that price point, and I would say it is also a really good option. There's a great everyday wearable piece, but for me, I would definitely look at a steel Royal Oak. For me, that's the ultimate steel watch. It's a beautiful piece. When you see it in real life, there's nothing like it. It really does show the difference between a Rolex and an AP. The finishing on those steel APs is absolutely incredible. It's the best bracelet in the game as well. It's absolutely stunning. You cannot go wrong with a steel Royal Oak. So depending on what size you'd like to wear, because obviously you've got a 41mm Datejust, if you were to match that, I would say you'd probably want to be looking at a 15202 ST, which is the ultra thin, or you'd need to be looking at a 15300 ST. The 15202 ST is kind of out the price range. So for me, the next best thing, and actually what I prefer over the 202, the ultra thin, is the old 39mm steel Royal Oak. That's a beautiful watch. You can get that in a black dial, a white dial, and a blue dial, and they all look amazing. The blue is absolutely stunning, but if you want a watch to wear a little bit bigger than that 39mm, then you can buy the white one. The watch wears probably more like 41mm though, so it would wear very similar size to your 41mm Datejust, purely because the actual lugs span quite far out from the wrist. So the actual diameter of the watch is 39mm, but the lugs make it wear much bigger. If you weren't into that 15300 ST, then maybe have a look at the 15400 ST, which is a 41 more modern version, 41mm version of that older 39mm. That one features the newer dial style, the newer battens, and the newer indexes. It also features the newer clasp. Obviously it's a current collection watch, so if you'd prefer to buy a current collection AP, then that's a great watch to buy. Just be aware that it wears much larger than 41mm though. Because it's flat, quite a thin watch, it definitely feels like a much bigger piece on the wrist. And you definitely can't go wrong with any of those dial options. That comes in a white, black, a light grey, and a blue dial. All of them are beautiful watches. The next watch you could think about, but I think it probably is pushing the price limit a little bit too much, is this 26320, which is the steel Royal Oak chronograph. That again wears a little bit more like a 43mm watch. It's much bigger, a great everyday piece, especially if you're looking for something slightly different to your more classic looking Datejust. But probably what I would choose out of all of those watches is a 26300 ST, which is the old 39mm steel Royal Oak chronograph from AP. That's a beautiful watch. For me, that's the perfect proportions as well. You can put it on a strap and it looks incredible. Yeah, that's one of my favorite watches ever from AP anyway. So yeah, I would definitely look at that watch as well for you. It's probably at the end of your price limit, but well worth it. I would look specifically at the Panda version because that's my favorite. I would choose between that one and the 15300 ST, the 39mm, the old Royal Oak. I think those two are beautiful watches and they're one of the best steel watches in the world. Either one of those you choose are going to be a watch you'll want to keep for life. They're stunning. If you're looking at dollars, I'll just mention a couple. So if you meant $14,000, I'd look probably at a green Submariner, the Hulk. That's a great watch again for everyday wear. It's a really cool looking piece, and probably another watch that I'd look at if you can. It's probably going to be quite difficult, but if you can find a steel Daytona, the old version of the old 116520 reference, you might be able to find one around that sort of price. I know the American market is slightly different sometimes to here, so you might be able to get one for that budget. The next question is, what is the best Swiss watch to start a collection? That's a great question. I'd probably say a steel Rolex, probably like a Submariner or a GMT or a Daytona steel, any of those steel watches, and then build your collection around that. But I'm going to do a video in the next few weeks, actually a collection of videos that will touch on that and kind of go through different price points for starting a collection at each price point. So stay tuned for that because that'll answer your question much more in depth. Thanks guys for watching. Let me know if I've missed out any questions or if you have any more questions for me. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please keep asking me questions either through Instagram or YouTube, and I'll do my best to answer them each month if we do a Q&A per month.